Hey, AP World. We're going to keep moving it into section 3 of Unit 6, right? And we've been learning about pretty much how a bunch of different countries, everywhere from European countries, Japan, the United States, all these different countries that are taking on these imperialistic initiatives. Either establishing empires, attempting to establish empires, attempting to extend their own borders, that kind of a thing, and kind of that whole projection of power. Section 3 pretty much deals with how do the people who are on the receiving end of this react to it. All right. And the short version is going to be a lot of resistance. Unfortunately, a lot of resistance that is going to be successful in the long run, but resistance all the same. Okay, so indigenous native responses, pretty much just getting into how do the people who are there on the ground, the people who've always called these places home, how do they deal with it when all of a sudden there are foreigners, there's outsiders who are now coming into their lands and pretty much saying, hey, we're here now. Start you off, and we've talked about this one before, so I'm going to make it quick. And really, if we think about the native people of the Balkans, all right, these are folks that have been under the control of the Ottoman Empire. And if we think about it in these terms, the Ottoman Empire, we could kind of throw in as another imperializing kind of a state. In that they, have these visions of empire, and they go out and they project their power onto smaller, weaker parts of, neighboring countries and that sort of thing. That's how they take control of the Balkans in the end. And so what we have forming up, and again, we talked a little bit about already, is that, technically a nationalist movement, Balkans who identify as kind of their culture, their land, different than their Ottoman overseers, and they revolt in the 19th century against the Ottomans. Actually, I think we can even take that a little bit before, and so we're going to see Bulgaria win their independence from the Ottoman Empire, Romania the same, Montenegro the same, all of them. And we already talked about Serbia, Greece, breaking away even before that. And so really what we're talking about there is just a massive movement to win independence from the Ottoman Empire. And in this case, success, okay? Although the success will come at a price. If there is one positive, and it's a tenuous one, but if there was a positive to the Ottoman control over the Balkans, was that the Balkans were populated by a lot of different people who had religious differences, cultural differences, ethnic differences. And some of them went back for centuries. There were grievances and old arguments and that sort of thing. And the Ottoman Empire was able to kind of keep all of that under control as these outsiders that didn't really have, any kind of role in that fight. They were just the outside, basically oppressors holding them down. Well, now they're gone. And now all those ethnic tensions come back up to the surface, and some of these old differences and old grievances and that sort of thing. And we will see when we get back to when we get up to Unit 7, and we talk about the outbreak of World War One, where this little part of the world is going to really is going to be the trigger point that's going to get this world war started because of kind of the conditions that are created with the exit of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, if that makes sense. All right, let's shift it over to the Americas. We already talked about the topic of the basically the Indian Removal Act of 1830, this displacement of Native Americans. First all of the large, still organized Native Indian tribes in the eastern part of the United States being relocated out into the west, given lands that the U.S. government deems as probably just being land that settlers would never want, that kind of thing. The undesirable land is given to Native Americans to to live on. By the time we're getting mid 19th century, the U.S. government is beginning to set up what eventually will be referred to as the reservation system, and that is giving these kind of designated allotments of land for Native American tribes to live on. And most of these are tribes who had, first of all, had a very, very different kind of relationship with the idea of land ownership than European white-based culture coming from the United States now. And they do resist. I mean, actually, there's resistance by some of the tribes, even in that initial movement to move tribes out of the eastern part of the U.S. to the west. But once we get to the later part of the 19th century, particularly kind of around the time of the Civil War on out to about 1890, there is a series of fairly ugly, brutal wars fought between native tribes who are trying to hang on to their land, their way of life, that sort of thing, and a U.S. government that has the completely opposite idea in mind. They're creating land for new settlers who are moving westward. There's a huge push of settlement just prior to the Civil War, American Civil War, and then another big push after the American Civil War, completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, all those kind of things. Here we see that manifest destiny really just kind of go full bloom. And caught in the middle of it, like we mentioned before, these native tribes, they're just trying to hang on for dear life. And tribes like the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Apache, the Nez Perce, they fight these wars with the U.S. government. I mean, they send out the U.S. Army to do the heavy lifting and what is usually referred to as the Indian Wars. Kind of this series of just isolated, ugly little conflicts. And the Native Americans do what they can to resist. They're typically outnumbered, outgunned, that sort of thing. But by the time we get to about 1890 and turning into the turn of the 20th century, that resistance by Native American tribes in the American West has been pretty much all snuffed out. Okay, so again, resistance, but not successful in the end. Strange story down south of the border in Mexico in the 1860s, France, who decides to flaunt the Monroe Doctrine. They know they can get away with this because in the 1860s in the United States, we're dealing with a little bit of a distraction, the American Civil War. And so what France decided to do is, well, first of all, Mexico owes France money, okay? There's some unpaid debts there. And the French, to make sure that eventually, somehow, some way, they're going to get their money, and also just to project their power back over into the Western Hemisphere, they do some political maneuvering, and they end up installing a French emperor, the guy you see pictured over there, Maximilian, to be the leader of Mexico. Okay, and it probably is. I mean, it's not like the French are declaring Mexico a colony. It's not going to that extreme, but this is definitely the kind of interference that the Monroe Doctrine had warned against. And had it not been for the fact that the United States was up to its eyeballs in just fighting this war against other Americans, I don't know that the French would have been very successful even getting this whole kind of crazy idea off the ground. Even as it is, the Mexican people don't really stand for it for very long, realizing it's like, wait a minute, we're being ruled by a Frenchman all of a sudden? Where did that come from? And the Mexican people do rise up, and the French very quickly, seeing the errors of their ways, withdraw. The American Civil War comes to an end, and all of a sudden it's kind of like, all right, they're back to probably paying attention again. By the time it all ends, the Mexican people, new Mexican government arrests Maximilian, executes him, and a short-lived, weird little experience there down in Mexico. But successful resistance by the indigenous or native people of Mexico themselves. All right, let's flip it over to South Asia, aka India. 1857, the Sepoy Revolt. So we talked about who those Sepoys were. Okay, again, this kind of almost like a private army of the British East India Company, and almost exclusively made up of Indian recruited troops. Okay, this revolt comes after a long string of kind of accusations of the British kind of misusing the Sepoys, a lot of times, a lot of lack of respect from the Europeans that kind of oversee the sepoys. A lot of times they have British, either former or kind of even in some cases active duty British military that oversee the sepoy troops. And there's a lot of friction between the British and the Indian soldiers themselves. And there's always this ongoing fear by a lot of the sepoys that the British are going to, forbid them their Hindu faith and force Christianity on them. In 1857, it breaks wide open when it becomes public knowledge to the sepoys that the British have been arming them with muskets that use a paper cartridge. And to waterproof these paper cartridges, this is a cartridge. In other words, it's a little kind of a little paper tube that has gunpowder and a bullet in it. Okay, and these are old kind of muzzleloader weapons that they're using. Anyhow, that paper that they use to keep it waterproof and that sort of thing, it's treated with pig or beef fat. By soaking the paper in that, it makes the paper a little bit stronger and also kind of gives a little bit of a waterproofing effect. Well, if you think about the Hindu faith, the consumption of beef, pork, there's a problem there. And when the sepoys find out that the British have been, without their knowledge, have been having them and adding insult to injury, the way that the soldiers were trained to load these weapons was to tear these cartridges open with their teeth. And so, in effect, these sepoys are coming in, kind of like the thin line between consumption. No, they're not eating the paper, but it's in their mouth, and this is huge in terms of their faith, and so that is kind of like the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, and the sepoys revolt against the British. Okay, this very quickly gets out of the control of anything the British East India Company can do. They call on the British government for assistance, and before you know it, there are regular British troops pouring into India to put down this revolt, which in fact they do. Okay, the sepoy revolt is not successful in flinging the British out of India. Instead, more British pour in, and this time it's regular troops of the British Army. 1858, about the time the Sepoy Revolt is ended, is recognized as the time when India is going to become a full-fledged colony of Great Britain. Okay, again, there's been kind of this. It's been like a flirtation, economic colonization, I guess, by the British East India Company, but now it's full on, right? And the British over time will refer to this as the Raj, the British authority, their colonial administration, government, and control over India. And the British will, as the picture there kind of depicts, they will kind of, they kind of like romanticize. It's kind of weird in a way, this whole era when India will become, as I've mentioned to you before, the crown jewel of the British Empire, their most valuable colony, their most profitable colony. And the British to this very day, still in cinema, movies and books, they kind of look back at these rose-colored glasses at this time when, kind of like you see there are all these Brits all out there in their finest, and they'd have these poor Indian people that were there to kind of fan them and make sure that all their needs are met and that sort of thing. And so it's this just absolutely Eurocentric view of colonialism and imperialism, as they just kind of set up shop and live the good life, while the Indian people are basically struggling to survive all around them. That's your Raj, okay? But the Indian people do push back. They do resist. And the Indian National Congress, the INC, is created in 1885. And it's kind of ironic in a way when you think about it. Many of those who will come to be the Indian leaders of the INC are going to be a lot of them young Indian men who are handpicked by the British early on, sent to England to be educated. Okay, they send them to universities, Oxford, Cambridge, places like that. And then they bring them back after they've graduated to help the British administer the colony. All right. They want some of the native people involved in this as well. Believe it gives them a little bit more of some clout. All right, with the rest of the Indian people. But in gaining that education, a lot of these Indians are also gaining the education, the power to basically to free themselves. All right, and it is going to be many of those British educated Indians who will form the Indian National Congress. One of them who will join up in 1915 is the guy you see pictured over on the left side, Mahatma Gandhi. He, after receiving his British education as a lawyer, is actually sent to the British colony of South Africa to help the British administer that colony, and is fairly successful in his working that he does there on behalf of the British government. And in 1915, he is reassigned to go back home to India and continue his work there. Instead, what he does is pretty much parts ways with the British at that point, and will become one of the leaders of the INC, and eventually will become the leader, the voice, the face of the Indian National Congress. And it will take a while. This will be an independence movement that will ultimately bear fruit in 1947. Okay, I mean all the way after the end of World War II. So it's nothing that happens quickly. But in 1947, India will gain its independence from the British. They'll hold down their flag, and the Raj will pack its bags and go back home. All right, flip it down to Southeast Asia. Resistance going on down there. Most of it is going to be coming against the French, who again, establishing those colonies in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, that sort of thing. But the indigenous people, the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, Laotians, they all rise up against the French. The French send military forces in and fight a brutal war against them to crush that resistance, crush that rebellion. The photograph you see there on the right side, these Frenchmen all lined up looking so proud to display the heads of revolutionaries, basically, of freedom fighters that they have killed in fighting, and again, just using that superior European technology, military technology, especially by 1895. The British are using it in India. They're going to end up using it in Africa. The French are using it, but the Maxim gun, the original machine gun, is now one of the weapons that is available to these European armies to use on top of their quick loading, breech loading rifles, their improved artillery that they're using. All this is being brought to bear against these indigenous people who are trying to rise up, against these guys who are oppressing them. And in Southeast Asia, it is no different. I think by the 1880s, I think you have Thailand is still controlled by their own people, and then the old country of Siam as well. Everything else, the French take land, the British jump in and take some territory in Southeast Asia. The Dutch are down there. We talked about them down in Indonesia. And then, who else am I forgetting here? So, the Spanish even jump in and claim some territory. So, yeah, that's what is going on down in Southeast Asia. Not good days if you're trying to resist against the Europeans. Okay, the Philippines. If we're going to kind of jump in and look at that as an example, and I just noticed I've got number 1 for Vietnam and number 1 for Philippines. I guess that should be a number 2. All right. Sometimes, that's why I don't teach math. The Philippines is an interesting example to look at. If I'm going to play okay, let's go backwards in time machine here. Before the Spanish-American War that we were talking about, before when the Philippines were a colony of the Spanish. The Filipinos were already pushing back against the Spanish. There were resistance movements that were going on. The gentleman you see pictured there, Jose Rizal, was the leader of the main resistance movement in the Philippines. As you can kind of tell from the picture there, he's not like some kind of like out there in in the bush kind of resistance fighter, with a gun in his hand. He was more of a political leader, and he saw himself as a reform leader, and he wanted to reform the way the Philippines were being run. In particular, get these foreigners out and give us our freedom back. Let us, Filipinos run Philippines. And so he creates the Liga Filipina, which means Philippine League. And this was a political, basically like a political action group whose goal was to, one way or another, convince the Spanish that it was not worth their while to stick around anymore and to grant the Philippines independence. Rizal's efforts not too successful. He ends up being arrested by the Spanish and executed. Okay, and so the independence movement looks like it's kind of suffering. Now, it gets a big shot in the arm in 1898 when that Spanish-American War takes place. When the Americans show up in the Philippines to chase the Spanish out, the Filipinos are elated. They're ecstatic because, hey, Uncle Sam has shown up and he's going to give us our freedom and, chasing away the Spanish colonizers, and it'll be a brand new day and it's going to be wonderful. And it doesn't turn out that way at all. Because as soon as the Spanish have been kicked out of the Philippines, the United States more or less lets it be known that we're not going anywhere. You got you pretty much just got new overseers, and it's us, the Americans, and the Filipinos, they don't really skip a beat on this. It's kind of like, we were fighting against the Spanish to get them out of here. And we might have helped you out to get the Spanish out of here. But now that you've taken that position, we're going to start fighting against you. And so where this resistance movement had been aimed at the Spanish, now it's aimed at the United States. And we end up fighting a relatively brief couple years of a war that, might have kind of a few little parallels to what I was telling you about down in South Africa, the Boers. It's a very, very ugly war. Matter of fact, the United States kind of struggles in this war for a little while because rebels in the Philippines, they have home court advantage. I mean, they know the land. They use a lot of those same kind of tactics, kind of what we call guerrilla war, where you're using non-standard military tactics. You're using camouflage and ambush, hit and run. What some people would say is, no, you're not fighting fair. But the United States just ends up flooding the Philippines with troops, and by 1902 they have quashed the Filipino resistance. And the United States will pretty much treat the Philippines as, they don't call it a colony, but we'll treat it pretty much as a territory until a point after World War II, when the United States will eventually give the Philippines independence. But no, we'll establish military bases. It's like, boom, man, we are here, to stay, at least for the time being. Okay, and then down to Australia and New Zealand. We were talking about the British setting up, Australia, originally New South Wales, as this penal colony. Of course, in doing that, they have to contend with the fact that Australia is already populated with one of the oldest known cultures on the planet, the Aborigine people of Australia. And with them being one of the oldest cultures, they had land claims. They had been there for, kind of a millennium. And suddenly these, pasty white, skinny white, English guys are showing up and saying, nope, the land's ours now. And the Aborigines will fight back. It's going to be that same old story of the British being able to use superior technology and, their military tactics against a largely outnumbered and outgunned indigenous enemy, in the Aborigines. When the Aborigines attempt to make peace with the British, say, okay, fine, we won't fight you anymore. Can we just bargain out the land here? And the British pretty much take a position of, you're not citizens, and therefore we don't have to give you anything. And the Aborigines are pretty much pushed to the outback areas, almost, quasi uninhabitable territory, while the British take the best land for their people. That kind of thing going on, right? And then the Maori Wars we've already covered, okay? And again, the Haka, it looks impressive, but lined up against British muskets and weaponry, it just doesn't really stand a chance. And even though the Maori people put up a strong resistance, the British are able to quash that by the 1870s. So we're going to see this continuation of this pattern of the Europeans being able to use everything that they have at their disposal by especially the later part of the 19th century to just one by one crush a number of these resistance movements by native people, by indigenous people. We'll see this pattern continue on in Africa as we get that scramble for Africa and all these Europeans pouring in. The Sokoto Caliphate, which will be a part of, I'm trying to remind myself here, I think we're talking out in Western Africa, okay? And this is going back to some of those parts of Africa that, well, if we're using the word caliphate, we know they're Muslim, all right? And so this is going back to some of those territories connecting all the way back to the Trans-Saharan. Remember those good old days? Yeah, the Trans-Saharan trade routes. Well, now Africa is in there competing with all these other European countries trying to, take their piece of the African cake. And they will come up against the Sokoto people, and these are Muslims who had been involved in the slave trade, being out there on the west coast of Africa. They end up fighting a long, stretched out series of wars against the British, but by the early 20th century, about 1902, 1903, they have been defeated. And their territories now under complete and total British control. Right down in South Africa, you've got the Zoso people, and them also being pushed, squeezed out by the British. This is this is kind of a sad story. The Zoso were a kind of a herding culture. They herded their own cattle and kind of did kind of that nomadic herding lifestyle sort of a thing. Well, when the British show up and start establishing some of their territories and colonies in the area, they bring their own cattle with them as well. And is a little bit of an echo of the Columbian Exchange experience. Some of those European cattle are going to introduce diseases to the African cattle. You can see where I'm going with all this. And the Zoso people are going to panic as they start to see this going on, and they come up and these are the kind of ideas, folks, that are born out of desperation. Okay, something like this happens out in the American West, the ghost dance religion I'm reminded of with the Zoso cattle killing. When you have an indigenous population that is being squeezed by an incredibly powerful enemy, okay, in this case, the British, who by this point in time are well versed in how to conquer a colony. And, and so these people their backs are up against the wall. They are desperate. And some of their religious leaders convince their people that if they just kill all of their cattle, okay, their own, the Zoso people kill all of their cattle, that somehow it will magically make the British pack up their bags and go home. Okay. Again, if I make that connection back to the American West and the ghost dance religion that shows up in the American West in the late 19th century, it was this belief that if Native Americans practiced this religion and did all these different kind of the sacred rituals, that all the ghosts of all the Native Americans who had died fighting against the U.S. government would all rise up, and altogether they would throw all of the whites out of the West. And it would go back to the good old days when, the land belonged to nothing but the Native Americans, the indigenous people. Of course, again, you don't think like that unless you're desperate. And the ghost dance religion obviously didn't work at all. The Zoso cattle killing movement doesn't help at all. Instead, what it does is it triggers a famine for the Zoso people. They've killed off their food source and just makes it all the more easier for the British to go in and conquer them. Okay? Like I said, I mean, it's desperate, it's sad, and it just highlights and underlines the just how awkward and how lopsided these two sides are in these kind of conflicts. Okay, I'll cover the the Zulu Wars here. The Zulus were a very warlike tribe down in South Africa, and same story though. The British when they start laying their claim, after they fight the Boers, next they have to take on the Zulu, the native people. And the Zulus, they had fought some wars with the Boers themselves, but now they're taking on the British. But it's the same thing. The Zulus score maybe a few little early victories against the British, kind of catch them off guard. They are a large tribe. They are a powerful people. They are very, very warlike. But once the British have kind of been able, given that chance to kind of regroup and, come back at it a second time, again, they're able to use all the force and might and technology of a modern European army. And yeah, they conquer the Zulus and, cement their control over South Africa. Okay. Samori Toure and the French. This is kind of getting us a little bit more in kind of heading back to West Africa again. Okay. And this is Samori Toure is an African who is going to rise up. The French are establishing their colony. Another example, just another, and these are just examples of uprisings that take place, attempts to resist. Okay, never do we want to think about that. Just Europeans show up and all the indigenous people just bow down. It's like, all right, what do we do for you? Tell us where to start working. No, I mean, again, these people are always fighting back, pushing back. The sad part of it is that over and over again, and same with Samori Toure, this leader of these people, these West African indigenous people, they're trying to create a new empire. The French just immediately, kingdom, and the French just shut it down. And again, just used that same idea, powerful military forces, that sort of thing. The Mahdist revolt. This is going to take place in Egypt, and these are kind of radicalized Muslims who likewise are trying to organize themselves to push out all the European influences, that sort of thing. This is a revolution that's led by the Mahdi, who it means the guided one, and is one of these wars where the indigenous people believe they have faith on their side. They've got God, in this case, Allah, on their side. But the British have machine guns and artillery. And so while, the wars stretch out over a number of years, as you can see there, when it's all said and done, the British are still standing and the Mahdis, they are gone. All right. So another example of attempted revolt, attempted rebellion, attempted, resistance to all this that just doesn't work. And then I think the last one I'm going to throw at you here is the Asante War. Okay. And this is going to take place. This is another one, kind of more towards the western regions of Africa, and this is a strange war. It's sometimes called the War of the Golden Stool, and the picture you see there right here. Was kind of this almost like the throne of the Asante Empire, which happened to be led, by the way, it's kind of hard to tell from this really old photograph, but it's led by a queen. Okay, so the Asante have this woman at their head and leading them, and the British kind of move in. And as soon as they begin to figure out things about the Asante people, and they realize the importance of this stool, okay, they demand it of the Asante people. To them, it's kind of like, you're going to show us respect. We're bigger than you. We're more powerful than you. We want the stool. The Asante people instead pretty much say, you're not taking our stool. We're gonna fight you instead. And they do. They end up fighting this war, but same old. When it's all said and done, the Asante will be, vanquished, and the British will have another colony they can add to their growing list. All right. So there you go. That's going to cover us on all this resistance, which, thank goodness, I'm coming up on 35 minutes here. But that gives you a any number of examples to be able to lean back on, whether it's here in the Americas or out in Asia or in Africa, pretty much anywhere around the world. Okay? That's where I'm going to leave it for now. Till next time, see ya.